Hey, what's going on, everybody? I wanted to break down some of the techniques I use to make my renders look more photoreal. I recently made this render of a somewhat beat up light fixture, and a few people asked if I would break down this approach to making things look more realistic. So in this video, I'm going to talk about my surface imperfection maps and my techniques with them, and how I use them to get more believable images. Getting your render to that last 10% is really hard, because that last 10% is like the final stretch of making something look completely photoreal. And a lot of that in that 10% is making things look less perfect, because in 3D, everything kind of tends to come out looking absolutely perfect. And that's actually really bad for photorealism, because there's no such thing as absolutely perfect in the real world. Everything has been dented, scratched, smudged, moved. Something is different about it. So it's really important to have a good set of surface imperfection maps in your toolkit so that you can quickly add as much subtle detail, scratches, or really heavy scratches as you need. It becomes really important as you move forward into photorealism to have a variety of these that you can layer up and change and quickly try things out. And that's exactly what we have with surface imperfection scratches on Greyscalegorilla Plus. We have this library that you can quickly drag and drop different scratches and try and audition things, and they work perfectly with our materials, which is exactly what I'm going to show you in this video. We're going to be taking this Edison bulb and kind of making it look old and worn and all messed up. Okay, so here we are inside of Cinema 4D. I'm using Arnold here in this video, but you can absolutely take the techniques and apply them to your renderer of choice. We've got our light bulb scene loaded up here. We've got our bulbs separated here, and I'm just using a simple scene with some layers just so I can isolate different parts of the bulb. And I do want to call out, though, for this particular model, it's important when you're doing any sort of glass bulb like this that you're applying only the surface imperfections to the outside of the bulb. On the inside of the bulb, of course, there wouldn't be any scratches because it's a vacuum. There's nothing in there. But on the outside, it's prone to get scratched, scuffed, smudged, whatever. So all I did is take my bulb model, and it does have some thickness, so I just separated out the two different surfaces with a poly selection. So I have a glass inside material, which is just a clean glass, and then I have a glass outside material, which is what we're going to be using and scratching up. All right, so let's take a look at this material. It's just a standard surface glass, pretty basic, nothing too crazy. I do have a slight Cinema 4D noise on it, just to give it a little bit more character so that the lines aren't perfectly straight. Just kind of breaks up the surface a little bit, which I kind of like. All right, so we're going to add some roughness scratches to this glass. So the first thing I'm going to do is hop over to my Greyscalegorilla Plus library and find a scratch that I think will work well. And I'm just going to grab one just by random and dump it over into my nodes. There we go. Let's make sure that we're setting this color space as linear. And let's go ahead and isolate this out. And there it is. It's way too big right now, so I'm going to go over to the UV scale UV and just double this to make it a little bit less large. Let's start to put this together. So the next thing I'm going to do is throw this into a range, which is basically going to allow me to control the output of our scratch map. So if we go in here and we look at isolate our range, we're going to change this up a little bit. We don't want to apply roughness like this extreme. Basically, 1 is just going to be way too rough. In fact, let's go ahead and dump this into our roughness right now so you can see what this will look like. It's going to be really, really messed up, which, might be something that you're going for, but not for this. We're trying to do something that's realistic, subtle, and looks believable. So right off the bat, let's go ahead and bring our output max down to maybe the most we want this to be scratched is maybe like 0.2. And then maybe we want just a little bit of min, just so that it's not completely clean. It's just a little bit goes a long way here. And already that's feeling pretty good, but maybe we want to clamp this a little bit. So I'm just isolating this range, and we're just going to clamp the input min to like maybe 0.1. Let's go 0.05. And then the input max will do like 0.85. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now I want to maybe turn on the filament just so we can see what that will look like. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. I think we could go a little bit more extreme with it, so I'm just going to change this to like 0.3 on our output max. We're going to go a little heavy-handed for this, just so that you can see it a little bit easier in the video. In fact, let's just make this a little bit bigger so we can see it. And I'm just going to region, holding down Shift. All right, that's feeling really, really rough and scuffed up, which I think is working pretty well for us. The next thing I'm going to do is use that same map in a bump. The thing is, like, scratches on glass are so small that they're almost imperceivable. So we don't want to go heavy-handed with our bump on this. So let's go ahead and work on that. In fact, I'm just going to unplug the roughness altogether and hide the filament just so that we can concentrate purely on the scratch. And for that, I'm just going to work on just the side where I can see the light coming through here. I think this is going to be a good place to play with that. All right, we're going to pull off another range. I'm just holding down Control and dragging that range. We're going to plug this into the input. And for this guy, we want our scratches to be like cut out of the glass. So we need to mess around a little bit with this. All right, so now you can see we're pushing the surface down. So we're going to layer this into our bump. And right now we have that C4D noise that we showed you earlier. So let's grab a layer RGB. Okay, I'm just going to double click this, bring our layer RGB down. We're going to throw our noise into the first layer right here. And then we're going to throw this new one into the second layer. And let's go ahead and isolate this. And now we're kind of going to see this combination. And I think I'm going to set this to multiply, which means that we're going to have to go back into this range, and I am going to have to change this to a 1 because we don't want to multiply that 0.5 on top of that noise. So let's just go ahead now and we're going to just drag this intensity or this mix value down. And now it's the time when we should probably look at the final surface here to see how it's going to be contributing. All right off the bat, let me just zoom in. I'll just do like 120% zoom on that. You can see we're getting quite a bit of scratching, quite a bit of bump, and it just doesn't look very realistic. Kind of looks like it's not glass. It kind of starts to look like plastic because that's something that a plastic would sort of allow itself to be scratched like this. But let's go ahead and just mix this down a little bit more. That's feeling a little bit better. Again, it just needs to be almost imperceivable. It just needs to sort of like feel it more than see it. Let's take a look at this corner over here. And for this guy, I think I am going to clamp just a little bit of the black. And I'll do the same thing with the white. Because I want to see just parts of it start to really show up in the bump. Good. All right, that's feeling pretty good. Let's check it out up here. I tend to use the region quite a bit just because there's no sense in like having it think about different parts of the frame that I'm not really paying attention to, so I try to use the region quite a bit. Okay, that's looking good. All right, so let's plug our roughness back in. And let's kind of look at the whole thing now. That's looking pretty good. Zoom this back out. Yep, that's looking really good. Okay, let's jump back in and get everything with our filament. I love how the scratch, you can really see it over the filament. This is really, really beat up. Again, this is heavier than I would probably ever go, but for this purpose, it kind of works really well. So it's very simple. You're just using the scratches, putting them into a range so that you can control the exact roughness that you want. You could also put this into a ramp if you're using Octane and control it that way. I tend to use the range. I don't know, just a habit, I guess, of seeing the values. All right, that looks pretty darn good. So I think I'm ready to move on. I'm going to show you my second favorite way to use surface imperfection scratches, which is going to be to layer materials to kind of make it look like a finish or something has been scratched off, revealing a different material underneath. Here we have this sort of like space gray, flecky kind of metal casing for our light bulb. And I've isolated just the space gray material. By the way, all of these materials in this project are found in our new Tech Products material collection, which you can check out if you're a member. So the first thing I want to do is reveal this sort of like unfinished version of this metal underneath, which is why I have the anodized space gray, and I brought in another one called anodized silver. And I'm going to walk you through this material in a second here, but I just wanted to kind of describe what's going to happen. So if something like this is scratched, it's not going to be black and have that space gray material. It's going to actually gouge out the raw material, the untreated metal underneath it. So in my case, the closest thing that I'm using is just going to be an anodized silver. Let's figure out what we want to reveal a mask, and then I'll walk you through the mix shader in a second. So I've already got one sort of built here, but we're going to build one from scratch just so that you can see the method that I'm going to use. The first thing I need to do is load in a scratch map. So I'm going to go over to the plus library, and we're going to find one. Just come over to textures, surface imperfection scratches. There we go. Okay, so let's find one that is fairly minimal. I don't want a ton of scratches on this. So let's jump over here and drag that in. Cool. So let's isolate that after we set it to color space to be linear. Let's go ahead and push this out to the beauty and take a look. Cool. All right, so let's let that cook through. I don't know why it's taking so long. I think maybe because I have a displacement happening on this other material, which I might go ahead and just turn off for now. Oh, let's also just isolate the pieces that we're working with. So we're not working with the cord, the filament, the bulb. We're only working with the metal housing right now, so that should help speed things up a little bit. Okay, cool. Yeah, this is actually pretty good. I might want to make the scratch a little bit smaller, so I'm just going to change the UV scale to 2. And for the sake of this video and speed, I think I am going to disable the displacement on that other material, so that'll speed that up a little bit. There we go. So these two different materials are created via a poly selection that's allowing me to do that knurled displacement, which is another one of the Tech Products materials, on just the areas that I need. So we're only going to be working with the sort of like bottom and top parts of this housing. So that looks pretty good. Let's jump back in here. This might work. I think I might offset it just a little bit to kind of get rid of some of that too much scratching happening in certain areas. All right, that feels pretty good. So we want this to happen both on just the edges and on the entire piece itself. So I think for this guy, it's just going to be on the entire housing, not on the edges so much. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. Let's go ahead and drop in a layer RGBA. Cool. Let's look at this. Put this into layer 1. Because this is going to be our overall scratches, and we're going to mix on some curvature scratches into this in a second. All right, so that's pretty much established. Good. All right, so now maybe I'll peel off a second copy, which is going to be hitting Control. And this time I'm going to use a different scratch. So let's go ahead and jump back into our plus library. And let's find one that's a little bit more dense. So I'm going to grab maybe 29, put that back over. Actually, I didn't need to split that out because I was just grabbing a new one anyway. Let's go ahead and change this guy to a UV scale of 2. Let's isolate that, make sure it's what we want. And yeah, that's going to look good just on those edges. I'm going to go ahead and just drag a region. We're going to use this to drive a range. Let's grab our range and push that right over here. And again, this range is going to be what we're going to be controlling the radius of a curvature. So if you're using a different renderer, maybe you're using Redshift or Octane. I think Octane still calls it dirt, and Redshift calls it curvature. So you can drive it very similarly in those other renderers. Okay, so let's take a look at our curvature. And we know that this is a pretty small area, so we're going to have to change our curvature radius to be pretty tiny. So we're going to do that with our range. So let's go ahead and change our range to like maybe 0.05. And really what we're trying to do is isolate it down to just that edge. So 0.01. I'm just trying to get it down pretty small. Something like that might be even a bit high. Let's go down a little bit more. Something like in there should be good. Okay, so now we've got our curvature happening, and we're just going to add this to our RGBA layer into input 2, and we want to make sure that input 2 is set to plus, because we're going to be adding that. And now if we look at that, we should have a matte that is on the edges and then also in the entire housing itself. Now, this might be a bit much for the entire housing. In fact, I think I want to change my scratch map on the main part of the housing. Something even more minimal. So I'm just going to look, I'm going to grab 43, drop that in, and put that right into layer 1. Make sure we set that to linear. Same thing goes with the other one that we brought in. Set that one to linear as well. Okay, this is looking much closer to what I had in mind. All right, cool. So now we have our matte, and this is what we're going to be using to reveal our other material. I'm just going to change the range a little bit, bring that down just a little bit more. Yeah, something like this. This is going to be very weathered, but that's okay. All right, so we have our matte set up, and we're just going to be revealing two different materials. So the way that I'm doing that in Arnold is I'm using a mix shader. So this mix shader has an input for shader 1, shader 2, and a mix. You can see I've got the anodized space gray material right here. I haven't really tweaked it at all. And then I just dragged in the silver anodized just as a reference. And I'm not going to just do that again, but you can just like literally drag it from over here, and it's going to be a referenced material. So I've got the original space gray going to shader 1. I've got the anodized silver going into shader 2. And now we're just going to be using this matte that we made as our mix. So if we pipe this over into our mix, we're just going to take it out, put it right into our mix. And let's go ahead and look at the output of this material now. And now you can see we've got that anodized metal kind of showing through just in the areas that we want it. Okay, cool. So that's looking pretty good. And the reason you're not seeing it over these middle parts is because that is a different material that we're going to jump into in a second. So I want to use the same exact matte to create a little bit of a bump. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's pretty easy. We're going to make another range. We're going to split this off. So let's go ahead and push this into another range. This is going to be our bump map. So we're going to isolate this range out on our matte. And we're going to change this to 0.5 and 0. So basically, we're kind of going to be inverting this a little bit. So now it's going to be pushing those scratches down. And from there, we're going to dump it into a bump node. So let's just move everything over here. Bump, 2D. And we're going to push this right into the input of the bump map. And what's great is we don't need to set up any sort of like complicated layer system for our bump, because our normal map of our space gray has a little normal input right here. And we can just take this bump output and put it right into our normal main. And let's bring the intensity. Actually, we'll look at it as is just so you can kind of see the intensity there, which is pretty dang intense. Let's go ahead and look at this bottom area a little bit closer. And you can see it's way too intense, this bump map. So I'm going to bring it way down to like maybe 0.01. I just want to be able to sort of like see that it's there a little bit. That's better. I think I'm also going to just increase my camera AA so we can get a little bit of a cleaner look. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the final output of this mix. And I think we're going to start to see a nice little wear on that edge, which is looking good. Okay, so let's take a look at it up here. Yep, that's looking good. I love this one right here. This little scratch right here. It looks great. And let's take a look at the very top part. All right, so now we need to do that same technique on this knurled metal piece that we were sort of like turning off earlier. You can see it's already got some of that in there built in, but we are going to go in there and take a look at that material now. So that one's just going to be in the space gray knurled. And it's pretty much the exact same shader that we had in the other one, only this one has a displacement map. So let's go ahead and throw that displacement map on. And I stole this displacement map from the knurled metal material in the Tech Products collection. So let's go ahead and let that cook for a second. And for this one, I'm not so much interested in the curvature because I don't really think it's going to be super applicable to this. But I do want to use the same exact setup that we did with this like little chips of paint or the chips of the finish coming off of the housing on the body of the housing. So I'm going to jump back into this guy and we're just going to steal this entire thing. We're just going to go copy. I'm going to select it, hit copy. I'm going to jump into the knurled and hit paste. And let's move this over. And you can see I've got the other one in here already. And we're just going to swap that out. We're just going to delete this. Delete that guy. Cool. And we're going to use this dude as our bump. We're going to throw that into our normal. Let's go ahead and isolate this. I want to get those the same exact scratches that we had in the previous material over to this material. So you can see that scratch is already coming through the bump right here. It kind of picks up here on this housing area, and then it kind of like comes up. So we're just going to isolate this little piece right here and do like 120 and 120 just so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, we're going to take this, and now we're just going to be layering that same exact material. So we do already have the same exact mix setup that we had in the previous material, going from our anodized silver to our space gray. And we can just now pull this matte that we created from way back in the other material. And we're just going to throw that into our mix. If I can find my... It's like being a microsurgeon here trying to manipulate these tiny little nodes. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. And there we go. Now we're seeing that same silver scratched from our previous build. So let's jump back out to 100 and 100, and let's go ahead and look at most of the housing here. And this is very beat up. It's more beat up than I probably would go. But we're seeing some really nice scratches happening, you know, brushing that finish off, scratching that finish off of our housing. And it's super scratchy here because of the curvature. We could probably go in here and isolate more of that if we wanted to, but it's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and turn on the other layers so we can start to see more of what this thing looks like in context. These are kind of the main ways that I like to use these surface imperfections. I'm using them in bump, in roughness, most of the time in roughness, and occasionally I'll use it to layer a material. And that's really kind of what I wanted to show you. It's just the different ways that you can use them. I have some actually happening on this rubber piece up here as well. They're really versatile and really fun to use, and they really add a level of realism that is impossible to get without them. I think it's either this sort of thing is either built in your material or you're going to have to figure out ways to add it realistically. So these are real scratches. These are scratches that we scuffed up and scanned in, and they're really high quality, and they're all 4K and tile perfectly, so they're really useful. And being able to jump into the Plus library is also a great way to audition different ones and try them out. But yeah, so that about wraps it up. I hope you got something out of it, and I will see you in the next one. We're really stoked at this whole new library of scratches, and we are looking to add even more surface imperfections in the future. So stay tuned for that. I feel like there's some good stuff in there.